Welcome back. In accordance with my scheme of starting with the most boring topics first, let's talk about listening. Listening is a skill, even if it doesn't seem like it. And of course, the listening section follows the research section because listening is closely tied to research. We exercise our listening skills for two main purposes. Firstly, we need to use our listening skills to listen to our own music. This is to do things like basic error checking, checking for problems with intonation, rhythm, tone, if there are any bad noises in our song, or just making sure that all the important parts in our song are intelligible. And secondly, of course, we want to make sure that our song sounds good. We also need to use our listening skills when we're listening to other people's music. When you're listening to music as part of conducting research, you want to be able to distinguish what's actually going on so you can pick out the parts that you like and pick out the parts that you don't like and figure out how to emulate that in your own music production. There is also a technique specific to mixing called reference mixing, which actually we're not going to cover much here, but it does involve listening skills. Now let's go a little bit more in depth. Firstly, we got to listen to our own productions to listen for things like problems with timing, intonation, unwanted artifacts, noises, and mistakes, such as that introduced by sloppy cutting, and mixing, which we are going to cover in more detail in the mixing section. Now, of course, when you're listening to your own music, you're not just going to be listening for those tiny, minuscule mistakes, most of which you have some leeway in dealing with. You also need to be worried about high-level stuff. You need to be asking questions like, is there anything that needs to be added or removed? Is there too much or too little going on? Is your song too boring or is it too busy? How does your song sound? Does it sound too muddy or harsh? Does it line up well with the story you're trying to convey? Can you make out the most important element? In many songs, the most important element is the vocals. Now here are some tips for listening to your own productions. Firstly, here's something that I don't do enough, taking breaks. Prolonged listening to music, especially at high volumes, can really fuck up your hearing perception, and over time it can even cause hearing loss. If you're feeling very irritated and fatigued while listening to your own music, it may be time to put the headphones down. Now, another technique that I find particularly helpful, especially when I'm looking for small errors, is listening to the song in different contexts. Listening to your song in different contexts can help you find mistakes, features, and ideas that you wouldn't have noticed listening on your normal sound system. It can also provide you with a better idea of how the sound of your track is going to translate across different listening systems. In order to listen in a different context, you can listen on a different sound system, such as using your smartphone or your car speakers or your laptop speakers, or you can literally listen to it from a different location. Different locations will have different kinds and levels of ambient noise, as well as spatial characteristics, all of which can color the way that you hear your productions. One popular mixing trick is actually to listen to your production from speakers down a hallway. Another more advanced listening tip is from time to time to listen to the production in mono instead of stereo or surround. And for those who don't know what that means, basically most digital audio is structured in stereo, having two different tracks of audio information, one for your left ear and one for your right ear. And when you listen on a stereo speaker system or a pair of headphones, the left ear channel gets played on the left speaker and the right ear channel gets played on the right speaker. This capability allows us to create the illusion of audio being played in a physical space. This capability is also heavily abused by ASMR videos. Having a noise heavily panned off to the left or right gives the impression of something being very close to one of your ears. When you listen in mono, however, there is only one track, and if you're listening to a mono track on a stereo system, then both speakers will play the same information. Now let's get back into why listening in mono from time to time is important. Why do this? One reason that you might want to listen in mono is because, well, firstly, some sound systems are just mono sound systems. You have one speaker and that's it. But also, if music is being played on a stereo system from a certain distance away, it may end up effectively acting as a mono audio source. Also, certain issues that deal with translating the music between different sound systems can be more easily detectable in mono. If you have doubled vocal tracks, which are a method where you take two different vocal takes and you pan them off to either side of the mix to create a fatter vocal sound. Issues with intonation and timing will be more audible in mono than in stereo. There are lots of physical and psychoacoustic reasons behind these things, which I won't go into here. Additionally, some producers swear by the method of adjusting panning in their tracks while listening in mono. If nothing else, you can look at mono as just another context in which you can listen to your song. Now here are some tips in particular for people who are recording vocals or instrumental tracks. When checking your intonation, it may help to check against a tuned instrument such as a synth that essentially has perfect pitch. And obviously you can also check against a real-world piano, which I don't have at the moment. Similarly, for vocalists, it can be helpful to check your intonation against an auto-tune version of your own vocals. And if your pitch is all over the place, then auto-tune will capture that. Chin up, don't bet on sinking ships because you've got to be more grand. Chin up, don't bet on sinking ships because you've got to be more grand. Even if you are a pitch correction purist and you believe that autotune is for losers, autotune can still be useful for you. In terms of rhythm, the best thing to do is probably to check against the click track or against the drum track. Of course, keep in mind that not everything has to be perfectly aligned to a click track. A lot of famous music was not even recorded to a metronome. Bands that didn't use metronomes on some of their biggest hits include Rush, Earth, Wind & Fire, and Creedence Clearwater Revival. If you try to align their tracks to a click track, it simply won't work. And even when a lot of artists do use click tracks, they don't play exactly on the beat. A lot of West Coast rappers and rap groups, think Cypress Hill or Snoop Dogg, actually make it part of their style to rap slightly behind the beat. Jay Dilla made a whole career out of not even being on the beat. Now let's talk about listening to other people's music. And again, as we mentioned in the research section, this is all about figuring out the things that you like and figuring out how to make the things that you like. Now we're going to talk about the listening journal. For beginners, what this is a method for mindfully listening to music. Essentially, you just need to take notes while you listen to music, or at least just think about the questions that are listed here. Try to identify what are the sounds that you're hearing, what are the instruments used, or how do they make that sound? What about the sound or the song appeals to you? What doesn't appeal to you? What do you want to avoid? What makes a song feel the way it does? What makes it sound unique or exciting or creative? These are all things that you can pick up in your listening journal and try to incorporate into your own music. And if you don't know the answer to any of these questions, you can always try to ask somebody. Here are some example notes I took on Tatsuro Yamashita's music. Your notes do not have to be this sophisticated. There's a lot of music theory involved in these notes, but this is sort of an example of what you can do when you're listening to music. Again, as a beginner, it is perfectly productive to just address the questions on the previous slide. Now, those of you who are more musically advanced can move into transcription rather than just taking broad notes about a song. Of course, this requires you to have a lot of familiarity with how to play your instrument. Transcription is essentially the act of copying music by ear and either writing it down or simply learning how to play it. This is one of the primary techniques used by jazz musicians for developing their musical skill. In our case, combining transcription with a little bit of musical theory can provide a lot of insight on understanding other people's music, and particularly when playing transcriptions, it also helps us internalize their style into our musical vocabulary. You can choose to transcribe segments as long or as short as you want, from an entire song down to a single riff or even a single figure within a solo, and you can transcribe at many different levels of detail. You can start by simply copying the chord progression of a song or the bass line, which is just single notes, and if you get really good at transcription, you can do note-by-note transcriptions of entire songs. If you need resources to check against, of course, you can always check against the actual sheet music for the song, or against online lessons or tutorials that teach instrumentalists how to play that song. But of course, reading off sheet music or listening to a tutorial won't help us develop our listening skills as much. If you're really looking to seriously challenge both your production and your listening skills, you can make a cover song by ear, like I did for That's Life. While we're in the listening section, I might as well address the hardware that we use to listen to music, namely headphones and monitors. Now take the following section with a grain of salt. This is mostly what I got from stuff online. I'm not an expert in hardware. I've used the same headphones for around 6 years, and aside from my phone speakers and a pair of wireless earphones, these headphones are pretty much the only thing I use to listen to my music. And if they're good enough for Snoop to wear for 5 minutes, they're good enough for me. Studio headphones, also known in the producing world as cans. Unlike consumer headphones, studio headphones are not necessarily meant to provide the best listening experience, but they are meant to provide you with a neutral, high-fidelity sound that can be used to mix a song that will be heard on many different sound systems. The main things that you're looking at when selecting headphones are comfort, build quality, and frequency response. As with any consumer hardware, quality increases with price, but you get diminishing returns. The baseline thing for comfort is that you want to make sure that the headphones you buy fit your head, firstly, and then all the ergonomic stuff that I don't understand follows. Now when I talk about frequency response, I am mainly advising you to avoid really cheap headphones which can't accurately reproduce low or high end, or heavily marketed consumer headphones like Beats headphones which tend to boost bass frequencies. Boosting bass frequencies can be great for your listening experience, but not so great if you want to mix a neutral sound that can be reproduced well across many different sound systems that aren't your headphones. Now, in addition to these factors, there are two main types of headphones. There are open back headphones and closed back headphones. Closed back headphones tend to be more durable, and they will have less bleed in recordings, meaning that if you're playing a sound through your headphones, it is more easy for a mic to accidentally pick up a sound played through open back headphones rather than closed back headphones. This is mainly relevant in vocal recordings where you're using headphones to listen to the music while recording your singing. This also means that closed back headphones will allow in less noise from the external environment, such as the one going on behind me right now. On the other hand, being closed back headphones have the potential to introduce unwanted resonances into the audio that you're listening to, whereas open back headphones will have more fidelity by being less resonant. Another factor to consider is whether the headphones cables are detachable, which can be important if you are the kind of person who breaks cables by sitting on them with your chair. Another thing to consider is the range of motion for the headphone cups. Of course, range of motion has implications for comfort, but this can also be important in vocal recordings, and I'll explain this in more detail in the recording section, but essentially there are times where you might want to consider having one ear off the headphones. And if your headphones are completely rigid, you can't really do that without risking breaking your headphones. In general, if you stick to headphones called studio headphones and stay away from the consumer stuff like Beats or AirPods, you should be fine. Lastly, a very brief note about monitors. Monitors are things that professional music producers use. Essentially, they are speakers with the same intent as studio headphones to provide you with a neutral sound that's great for mixing. I don't use monitors because just like that. That might cause some problems with the neighbors. The reason that music producers use monitors instead of just doing everything through headphones is that headphones do not accurately reflect many of the ways that most people listen to music. For instance, car speakers or home sound systems. But again, I've never used them, so I'm really not in any position to give advice about them.